Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we sit down with a guest to talk about a Disney Plus offering of their choosing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. If you like the show and can support us over there, we would, of course, definitely appreciate it, but if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we'd also love if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode with your friends. If you want to be part of the show, you can fill out our guest form at thatnerdysite.com/dplusguest. We had a handful of people respond after last week's episode, and I've been reaching out to a bunch of people to try and coordinate getting them on the show. But this week, we're returning to the well with our guest from last week as well, Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cameron?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be back.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm very grateful to have you back. Originally, I was supposed to record this episode with Logan to discuss Phantom of the Megaplex, but he got brought down with a case of strep throat, so it's been touch or go if he was going to be able to do it. And he might still be able to do it, so depending on like what you're hearing on Tuesday, January 28th, it's either going to be this episode or it's going to be that episode if I end up getting to coordinate with him. But these are evergreen shows, so it doesn't really matter when this goes out, when you hear it. But it's great to have you back. Thank you, Cameron. And when I reached out to you on this like last-minute thing and asked what you wanted to talk about, you said, let's talk about the Imagineering Story. And I was like, absolutely. Imagineering Story is definitely something I enjoyed as it was coming out on Disney+. But I did recognize, and I recognize this in the flurry of submissions we got because a whole bunch of people wanted to talk about various TV shows, and we haven't really approached that way of tackling this show yet. So I said specifically, okay, let's focus on like a couple episodes of that the Imagineering Story. We'll talk about the whole show, but if people wanted to like watch along with us or kind of know specifically what we're talking about, we are talking today about the first two episodes, effectively, The Happiest Place on Earth and What Would Walt Do? So I'm going to throw it to you, Cam. I talked a little bit that I enjoy the show and loved it coming out. Why did you want to talk about and pick this show?
Well, it's one of the shows that I think is most fascinating because it's a look at the kind of complex nature of the Disney Corporation, at least its core. At its core, it's an animation filmmaking studio with a theme park. Like, that is what Disney was and still at its core is today. Everything else is an extension. Everything else is building out from that. But the core principle was the idea that there would be a place, that there would be a creation, which would be the films and the animated series, like the animated films and everything that they were doing with the creative department, but that they would also be able to generate a physical place where people could go to enjoy the kind of idealism and creativity that is behind the Disney machine. And as much as we like to be super jaded about what Disney has kind of always been, but also has most definitely become in the last decade, after their massive acquisitions of numerous properties under Bob Iger.
Yeah.
Like the growth of Bob Iger and what Bob Iger has done to make Disney the powerhouse that it is, that it can do this streaming service, which is incredible. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy feat to do. We've seen people try it with many different opportunities, and all of them pretty much come crashing into failure. So yeah, I think that oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think Disney. I think there is enough of a love for Disney that this is something that they could have done with just Disney stuff. But the fact that they have in the last decade acquired Marvel and Star Wars and most recently Fox, and they can basically throw a whole bunch of other stuff onto this platform as well is icing on the cake. But I think even without a lot of that stuff, I mean, like as it is, like all of the stuff we've talked about on this show so far has still been like core Disney stuff.
That's true.
And obviously we're only a few weeks in, but yeah, I think there was such a love of Disney, and Disney historically had always been so good about like controlling access to their content,
Yeah.
with like putting things in and out of the vault, so to speak, that like you could only watch certain things, or if you didn't buy it by a certain time, you were going to have to resort to like eBay to find DVDs or VHS copies of something. So they already kind of like did almost a blue ocean type strategy of like controlling the supply and demand of their content. So I think they've built up this like frothing at the mouth kind of nature of people wanting to, have access to Disney. Like, even if it had just been like the classic Disney films, I think there would have been an audience for that they threw in like Disney Channel original movies and the, movies like Darby O'Gill, that we talked about last week. They kind of have added all of that other stuff onto all the TV shows and everything. I think is just like, it's more bang for your buck, and the fact that they're offering it for whatever it is, not $8 a month or whatever, as a comparable, like, it's not going to have as wide a variety of stuff as Netflix, because Netflix is going into every other bucket, but is going to have stuff that Netflix and the others won't have. It is a very like compelling notion that they were able to get this Disney Plus up and off the ground. But yeah, I think the major acquisitions that have happened in the Bob Iger years just kind of add increased value to all that stuff.
Obviously, for sure.
Like, yeah.
But I mean, outside of like the prices of things in Disneyland, everything else about Disney is always a sense of, when I say prices, I really mean like, so if you get like gear or merch from Disney inside Disneyland, usually that's a really solid piece of merch. Like, that stuff lasts years. The only thing inside of Disney, outside of a couple of places, is the food is not great. Like, that's pretty much it. But everything else about Disney screams quality. So when they're putting out a streaming service, a lot of streaming services, especially when they debut, don't have a lot of features. I was super impressed with Disney's response to people complaining that the older Simpsons cartoons were in that stretched ratio. And their response was, coming like as soon as we can this spring, we will have them in their original format as an option. And that response was immediate to people asking about it. Because it wasn't even like people angry about it. They're just like, man, I wish this could happen. And Disney's like, no worries, we got you. This sort of like the way that it, like, there's a couple of things that I think quality of life will definitely improve over time. But for where it was at launch, it was spectacular. And then it launched with, bangers coming out every week, and they decided to transition things into it. Instead of a drop model like Netflix does with the binge opportunity, they said we're going to eke it out week after week. And it's like, okay, this is very enticing, and I like that. I like that if you want to binge it, just wait till everything's done. But I mean, as we learned with The Mandalorian, you have to be careful, because Baby Yoda came out of nowhere and stole the hearts of America and the world. But I think that one of the reasons why I wanted to pick the Imagineering Story is because you learn about such a in-depth look and origin to the creative soul of the Disney Corporation, and how over the years the methodology and mentality of the directing, like the people who have been in charge of Disney, has always been to do what they can to let creative people create, to the point where like they're willing to like take big hits, they're willing to take big blows. The animated studio department, they were willing to take big blows for their ideas that didn't work out. And how did Bob Iger supplement that? He courted Steve Jobs and bought the controlling stake in Pixar, because he said, now you guys have the freedom and time to really work out what's wrong, to figure out what's wrong, and then come back stronger than ever. And they did. Disney animated features have been spectacular for the last, since Tangled?
Yeah.
Was there anything pre-Tangled that I would say is like up there with that? But I can't remember off the top of my head. I think Princess and the Frog was like a really great attempt at telling a more modern Disney princess story. I just felt that it was too many niches that they were trying to go in on. And it's sad because I think that the New Orleans section of Disneyland is so great. With that's where Pirates is, and so that's why everybody knows it. But it's also like just all that like flair of New Orleans there in that little section. I mean, that's where you get some of the best food with that gumbo in a bread bowl. There is out of sight good. So good. There, I've heard also like their clam chowder at that stand is really great too.
I haven't done the gumbo, but I've done the clam chowder, and yeah, it's a and I don't even like I'm not even a clam chowder person, but is real good.
Yep. And I'm not surprised at all to find out much later in time that the entrance to D23 is there as well.
Club 33.
Club 33. Yeah.
Yep.
So like
because it's because all of those like all of the little facades are basically demarked with address numbers, and Club 33 is so named because it is there at like 33 New Orleans Square or whatever.
Yeah. No, I just love that. So, but the idea and the core of like the Disney soul is the Imagineering department, because they're creative engineers who have built. I mean, we'll get into it when we start talking more about it, but the feat of engineering that actually is Disneyland is incredible. To see how it started and how it got built and how it got put together, and like the uncompromising will and dream of Walt Disney for his theme park is insanity. Like there is no way anybody who wants to say anything about Walt Disney, whatever you want to say, fine. The man was insane. The man was crazy. No sane person would have done what he did to build Disneyland. You just wouldn't. You wouldn't terraform an entire massive part, or like a massive orange grove, or several orange groves. You wouldn't like terraform them to make this place, and he did it. Mm-hmm. And his whole thing about, and one of the reasons why the Imagineering department's incredible is because Walt says, oh, like, it was funny because sometimes they're like, somebody be like, yeah, I made this joke, and it was like this offhanded joke, and Walt said, that sounded like a great idea, make it happen, and they were on the hook for that idea. And then they talk about like the people, and it's so cool seeing the individuals and people behind what we take so for granted, like the singing birds.
Yeah.
So we take that so for granted, but to find out like what it took behind the scenes for that, what it requires to do that to this day is just, they're brilliant geniuses who, I'm sad to say, if Walt Disney hadn't supported them, we would probably be living in the kind of Tomorrowland they sold us in Disneyland if those people were like in the regular sector.
Okay.
They're that brilliant. Like, these are brilliant human beings, and it's so cool to see them in their element talking about just like, yeah, we did this, and this, and it's like, what? And then they like take you inside the Matterhorn, and they're like, yeah, somebody hung up like a basketball hoop, so now we play basketball in here. And it's like,
yeah,
like, this is crazy.
Yeah, growing up here in Arizona, like, Disneyland was like the prototypical end of the year trip for like field trips and stuff for band and choir and orchestra and all that stuff. So like it was pretty common that I was going like once a year ish growing up. And then for like pretty much all of my college years, I just didn't get out to Disneyland. But then when PSX started going to Anaheim, they did the couple years there, that like really got me back into like a throw of going to Disneyland, because I basically always planned a couple days at Disneyland around PSX, and getting to do that with like friends in the Kind of Funny community was just a ton of fun, to the extent that like I ended up getting an annual pass and then going, just like taking a whole bunch of weekend trips in the last couple years to go hang out with fellow nerd Ben Bellevue and our friend Lauren Wilson, and we would just like, the three of us would just hit up Disneyland all the time, and so like I've become so much more enamored as a result of doing all that. And like I'd always been like a fan of the history of Disneyland, but it was really like the going back and forth out there so much more frequently. I started getting some of the like Disney books and like, hey, here's where all the fun hidden Mickeys are and all that kind of stuff. And so I started like engulfing that. So when this show got announced as like part of like the Disney Plus like new offerings, I was like, yeah, Mandalorian's gonna be cool, but like this is probably the thing I was most excited for, was getting to hear about the Imagineers who like made Disneyland happen, and have like continued to devolve and or to evolve and change and develop the park and the rest of the parks and kind of all of their entertainment section as a part of it. So yeah, this was definitely one that my routine, I think, when Disney Plus like launched, started out like, I'm gonna watch Mandalorian like Friday night when it hits, especially because I was like in between jobs basically. So it was like, okay, like Friday or Thursday at midnight or whatever, Friday morning when the new episodes dropped, I watched Mandalorian, and then I would watch Imagineering Story, and then I would go to bed. And that shifted a couple weeks into being like, yeah, Mandalorian's going to be there. I want to know like what happened in the next section of like the Imagineering Story. So for like the latter half of the series, basically that was the first thing I was watching every Friday was the new Imagineering Story when it dropped. So it stinks that it's only 6 episodes, and I don't know if we'll ever end up getting a second season or something like that to dive into like other stories that aren't explored in the series. But it's really cool what we did get. So I'm very excited to talk about it with you today. So I'm going to dive into our little history lesson here. This is, of the things we've discussed, this is certainly our newest offering, having originally released between November 12th and December 13th, 2019. Other notable releases of the time: The Mandalorian, High School Musical, the musical, the series, The World According to Jeff Goldblum, and Encore. Basically, like all of the Disney Plus original shows. The runtime is approximately an hour per episode, and there are 6 episodes in this first season. And within the Disney timeline, it is one of the Disney Plus launch offerings. So we have that. For the roll call, who's who in this film? Obviously, this being a documentary doesn't have like, it's not, I guess, star-studded cast, although there is a young not Jeff Bridges, Kurt Russell. There's a young Kurt Russell in the couple episodes we watched. But the director, Leslie Iwerks, was an Emmy-nominated director for the documentary on the Pixar story a few years back, and she has also done a documentary on Industrial Light and Magic, Creating the Impossible. And I have a little trivia thing about her that we will get into in a second as well. The writer was Mark Catalina. Doesn't have any other writing credits, but he's been an editor on a handful of other things, mostly documentary work. And then starring, you have Angela Bassett as the narrator, who's done a ton of things, very storied career. Most recently in my mind is going to be that she's the mother in Black Panther, but she's done a ton of stuff as well. And then you have many Imagineers and many Disney heads, past and present, kind of showing up throughout the show. For trivia, a couple little bits that I pulled together. This was originally announced as a feature-length documentary back in 2013, and then it was subsequently revamped for Disney Plus as a series of 6 one-hour episodes. Again, some of them run a little bit longer, but that's kind of the gist. And that's why, like Marty, is it Marty Skull? Something, Marty something, who was like a head of creative for years and years and years, Marty Sklar. He's very heavily featured throughout the series, and he passed shortly after, I think, filming. There's a dedication to him at the end and all that stuff. The other big trivia note I have is that the director, Leslie Iwerks, is the daughter of Don Iwerks, who is an Imagineer featured in the series, and the granddaughter of Oob Iwerks, who was an early friend and business partner of Walt Disney and the co-creator of Oswald the Rabbit and Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney basically like drafted up, here's what I think this mouse should look like, and then Oob kind of took that design and refined it, and so he's credited as the co-creator of Mickey Mouse. So nice little familial connection to the director here, and we see that I think throughout the series, that there's kind of like familial like parents and children kind of work together as Imagineers over the years. nice little cool, like, all in the family kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I have for the who's who in the trivia. So let's dive into, like, does it hold up? Obviously it's a new thing, but what do we think about this show in general? Obviously, I think we're both giant fans of it. Really enjoying kind of what it brings to the table. This was the first time in a month or so that I went back and kind of watched these first couple episodes, and yeah, it's just like, I love, one of the things I love in particular is the, like, introduction that you get into every episode, and how it kind of plays like the graphic. It's not like user interface or whatever. The graphical introduction really plays at, like, the design, the model work of, like, the subjects that you're going to be, like, seeing in that episode. So obviously in, like, the first episode, we have a lot of, like, the iconic Disney landmarks explored, because it's early age of Disneyland. But then, like, in later episodes, you have, like, the model of, like, the cruise ship, or like the Millennium Falcon, when they get to talking about kind of the expansion into Star Wars land and all that stuff. So yeah, I really enjoy it, and I love like, I think you talked about kind of all the great behind the scenes, really in-depth interviews that we get from so many people, past and present, kind of working in the Imagineering departments. But you, Cam?
I mean, I'll just outright say it. I love seeing, and I said it earlier, I love seeing the analytical engineering approach that these people had towards making some of the most classic amusement rides of human history. Just, like, there's so much about the little things. Like, this is why they're brilliant people, is because their focus is on these little things, and how do we work around that? How do we incorporate that? How do we do this? And to see them talk about it as, like this was, like, because it was their job. It was their job to do this. And it's amazing to see these people talk about, like, the really incredible, like, leaps in technology that they made while working on these projects to be things that amused families and children. And it's just, like, you are some of, like, the most brilliant engineers of your era, and you like, it's like, I forgot what story it is, or there's something about, like, a toy maker who's like, family made like, weapons, and he makes toys instead, and it's like, and he's brilliant or whatever. I forgot. There's, like, a couple of stories like that ish. But the idea of, like, somebody who has the ability to create something, like, magnificent in the eyes of, like, history and like, politics and, like, the world and the climate of the world, instead works on something small and considered insignificant. And it's just the joy they have when talking about what they worked on, the joy of seeing these brilliant minds at work, remembering what they did, seeing a lot of the like, it's important to note, like, Walt Disney was a man of his time. And while we look down on that, because men of that time had opinions that were ignorant and repugnant and wrong, it's important to note that, it's important to recognize the good with the bad, because we're all gray. But to see the progressive nature of a lot of what happened in Disney at its core, the female Imagineers, what they did, like, the astounding, incredible capabilities that these women had and the leadership that they took and that they had and were given, and the respect that they are shown when these men who at the time were probably able to say or do whatever they want. These are the old men that you would expect to have those kinds of opinions. Talk about how brilliant these women are and how respected they are. And it's just like, oh, wow. Like, these were really great, incredible thinkers and creators and engineers. And, like, as long as you had that creative heart and creative spirit, you flourished at Disney in the Imagineering department.
I love how often it comes up that they were, like, so ahead of their time in terms of, like, technological or just kind of like so forward thinking. You have in these episodes alone, they with Disney World kind of you have how eco-friendly and how environmentally forward thinking they were, in that you've got like an entirely self-sufficient solar plant running things back in the 70s.
When that technology
years
would not have
before-
been cheap. That technology
Exactly.
would not have been cheap.
Yeah, and you have them being immediately kind of at the forefront of digital audio and all that stuff, and obviously all the animatronics and whatnot that they've really helped pioneer over the years. They are just kind of like again, going back to like Epcot in particular, I think showcases so much of this, like early touchscreen, like being the first place people could go and experience touchscreens again back in the 70s, which still wouldn't really take off for another 30 years in a kind of a commercial sense. The fact that they were kind of exploring that stuff back then is mind-blowing.
Not just exploring, succeeding with it.
Yeah.
Just, oh man, they're brilliant people.
I also want to throw in here, thank you to Mike at Sigh of the Torrent, who chimed in on Twitter saying the Imagineering Story was fantastic. Besides all the great behind-the-scenes footage, they didn't shy away from talking about their stumbles and their failures. I think that's another great thing of this series as a whole. We see a little bit of it here and there in these first couple episodes, but it's probably not until really kind of at the end of this second episode where there's kind of a shakeup in leadership and people kind of abruptly leaving, and they definitely have to deal with kind of the vacuum, like following the like Walt and Roy Disney no longer like being the heads of the company, and what that's going to mean for WED and Disney Imagineering in particular, and that gets explored a little bit more heavily in the future episodes, but they are, especially when you get to, I think, the episode after like episode 3, I think, really touches on like all of the missteps of like Euro Disney at the beginning.
Yep.
And how they kind of needed to really rethink and restructure their approach to that, and they've managed to do it and kind of like relaunched it and rebranded it. But the fact that they don't shy away from those issues, or even simple things like I love the little story about there was a plumber strike leading into the opening of Disneyland, and so Walt had the choice, give them bathrooms or give them water fountains, and he chose to give them bathrooms, and everybody thought it was a ploy to force people to buy Coke. That's why they didn't have drinking fountains, and it's like, no, it's because we wanted you to be able to like go to the restroom. But like so much of that is just like the fact that like concrete was drying, the day of or whatever.
Oh yeah, things were sinking.
Things are sinking, and even continuing on into Disney World, and then again, years or decades later in some of the Asian Disney like parks opening, they're still cutting it like right up to the wire on getting a lot of those things, showtime ready. And I think another kind of good highlight of the failures that comes in some of the later episodes is like the MGM Studio Park. That it was just like, I remember one of the guys kind of like is going and touring it for the first time. Like one of the Disney executives is going and touring it for the first time, and he's like, so when are we on stage, basically? When are we, out there where the public is? And the guy's like, oh, we've been on stage for like 15 minutes. And he just was like, oh, this does not look stage like showtime ready. Does not look up to like the Disney standards. And I think you see that in what projects got like the attention and the focus and which ones didn't. And sometimes the ones that don't, like in these episodes, Tokyo Disneyland, like the team that was kind of put on that one was really scrappy, and they like all banded together and they made it work. And then other times you have those kind of projects that just kind of stumble as a result. And yeah, I like that they, or like even the kind of the initial launch of California Adventure that they talk about in a future episode, didn't really hit the mark, and so they had to again like rethink and evolve it over the years. And I think so much of that ties back to even early criticisms that Walt got with the park, Disneyland, be like criticisms being like, oh, there's too many unfinished rides, or this isn't a complete experience, or whatever. And Walt basically spinning that and saying, well, no, like Disneyland will never be complete as long as there is imagination in the world, or something to that effect.
Yeah, just so great.
It's like, yeah, and we see that now, 60 years later, where the park is constantly evolving, and with the the newly opened Star Wars land and all that stuff. I think there's I think it's a great model that they've continued to innovate and really drive forward. And they certainly, as is explored in these couple episodes, they basically created a new market. Theme parks were not a thing. You had like small level amusement parks, but they were run by carny folk and that had a reputation and all that stuff that is even highlighted in the episode. And Walt's like, my park is not going to be like that.
Yeah.
And so you get Knott's Berry Farm, and you get the Six Flags parks kind of opening up in response to this. You get Universal Studios going off and doing its own thing. It's just kind of like and SeaWorld is another one that gets highlighted. It opened up a new market, and one of the things I love is in these episodes, they talk about how in like 1983, 80% of the Disney revenue was coming from the theme parks, and only 20% was coming from like the movies and the other content they were creating. So it's like it is like a significant chunk of their business, and it's probably not that dynamic these days with all the other acquisitions and Marvel movies making billions of dollars, but there's still probably a healthy chunk that is theme park revenue. Everybody going out there to see the new Star Wars land rides and stuff. So I definitely think it's a great show to kind of explore. And it was a great show to launch Disney Plus with, because it is like here's a peek behind the curtain for the people who want it, and the Disney diehards that are out there that are buying Disney Plus because they love Disney. So let's talk about some of our favorite moments and or least favorite moments from these couple episodes. And, if you want to broaden it out to the whole series as well, feel free. Do you have any you want to immediately jump in with, Cam?
The one that jumps out to me immediately is when Walt dies.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy brings all the accounting people, all the business people, the business side of Disney in, and he basically tells them... don't think that this means that now you get to come in and dictate what the creative department does. These people have lost, we've all lost. He's like, I've lost my brother, you've lost your boss. These people have lost their leader.
Yeah.
These people have lost their font of inspiration. These people have lost, like you say, they've lost their leader. They're going to need time to recover. And we will respect that, and we will respect that this will hurt the creative process, and we will we will work on it from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that moment, because it's like everybody knows Walt Disney. People forget that Roy was always by his side.
Yeah,
Roy was the unseen right hand who kept Disney afloat. He was the sane man to his brother's madman. And it's so many things. Like, Roy was one of those people who, they even mentioned in the show, he was one of the only people who could really push back against Walt.
Yeah,
and say,
he was
Walt,
like,
this is
hey,
not...
we don't have money for this.
Yeah.
Because World War II hit us pretty hard, buddy.
Yeah. He's like, you're trying to build this theme park. We just got out of World War II. We don't have the money for this. And Walt being like, well, we need to figure it out. And so Roy is like this accounting genius to his brother's creative genius. Mm-hmm. And that somehow between loans and everything else, they came up with the money.
Yep.
They came up with what it was, and Like these brothers built like this company, and you have all these other like unspoken of unseen hands, but at the same time, I don't know if like I just don't feel like you could say it's like because of the narcissism or megalomania of Walt Disney that prevented these people from being spoken of and famous as he is, but I think you look back and you peer behind and you see behind the curtain in a show like this especially, you see the humility that so many of these people have, and the reason why Walt Disney is held up in such high regard is because the people who worked with him, who knew him, are the ones to profess that. It's not a hype machine, it's not a PR machine that did it. It's the people who knew Walt Disney in this professional manner that speak so highly of him that he's become this revered figure. And I think that that's an incredibly interesting thing. Not that, like, Walt Disney clearly, like, had an ego. He put a statue of him holding Mickey Mouse's hand at the front of the park. There was no question about whose amusement park it was.
But, yeah, it's his name on the park.
Yeah. But the thing is, it's also interesting that, like, there's no statue of Roy anywhere. There's no statue, like, but also at the same time, you get the sense that Roy didn't have that kind of attitude.
Well, like, I mean, like, Walt was the showman, and Roy was the behind the scenes. And I think Roy was content to be behind the scenes on so much of that. They talk about when Walt passes that, like, Roy wasn't planning on being like the next head of the company. They were gearing up on having somebody else do it, but like he kind of took the reins because that was like who they needed to have in charge at the time. But I think he would have been quite content to really just kind of keep being the money man behind the scenes. Like It's not like people don't often in companies, like the CFO is not the face of the company. It's always never. The CEO.
Never,
and so I think that's kind of what you saw in that dynamic. But I do like that kind of each episode of the show really is focused on a specific era of Disney. You have kind of the Walt Disney era in the first episode, then you kind of segue. It ends with basically him passing away, and then you have the Roy Disney era in episode 2, and you go into like Michael Eisner and Frank Wells for the next couple episodes, and then you get on to kind of the Bob Iger years in the last couple episodes. And I love that kind of like structure and framework of the series. And yeah, I echo your sentiment on that moment of like when Walt passes, everybody feels it, and you have a lot of great moments kind of built around that. One of the ones that I like in that same echo is kind of the quote where they're all kind of at a bar afterwards, and somebody says, "Well, now we're going to find out how much of our work Walt did for us." I love that sentiment because he was clearly like the creative lead and the creative spirit of Disneyland. The fact that he was always going over to WED, and people would be like, "You should get an office here," and he'd be like, "No, this isn't where I come to work. This is where I come to play."
So
yeah. Another standout that I want to highlight, and it got me again like this time, is Bob Burr, who was one of the original Imagineers who did Autopia and stuff, and he designed the Matterhorn. Like the whole sequence of him talking about like he was a car guy and now he's having to build a roller coaster and learn physics, which he did not learn, and trigonometry and all that stuff. Like he's having to learn all this stuff basically on the fly to build the Matterhorn. And then as you kind of alluded, like they go in, and prior to this, like I remember seeing, like in those like BuzzFeed stories or like the secret stories of Disneyland, you hear about the basketball court in the Matterhorn or whatever. And so I love that they like address that head on and basically say, no, it wasn't a basketball court. They don't have a basketball court, but this is where people took their breaks, and it didn't take them long to throw a basketball hoop there. So yeah, you could come and play basketball. And he's in there, and he takes his little granny shot and sinks it. And then they show that wall of like all the people who've worked in there over the years and who've signed their names on things, and like that is like such a throwback and a flashback to me of like I remember in high school in theater, like like all the theater kids signed like the backstage area, and like you would see everybody's names on the theater over the years, and it was like a little history thing. Like I went to the same high school as David Spade. I'm pretty sure David Spade's name was somewhere in there. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing that at some point.
No, that's the same thing for me. Somewhere in the theater department, like in the back behind the stage, is an area where all the shows that were at my high school were, and the names are there for everybody, including mine.
Yeah.
So.
And I love that they ask him, they're like, did you ever sign your name here? And he's like, no, because I never worked in here. And they were like, well, do you want to? And he's like, yeah, as the designer of this ride, I would like to. I don't like that he signs it like on the door, but it's still like a very emotional like moment.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that is, of these first two episodes in particular, like that's the standout of just him, like you getting to see like the archival photos and stuff of him building it, kind of juxtaposed with him talking about it, and going up and walking into the Matterhorn and kind of like being there at the park. It's like I love. Those are the moments I love the most, like hearing about the people who were there at the time, and obviously given the age of the park, you don't get too many of those people that were there at the beginning, but when we do, it's delightful, and throughout a lot of the other a lot of the episodes, you get like archival audio, talking about like people like John Hench, obviously one of the big creative minds of Disneyland, passed away many years ago, but they have like audio of him talking about certain rides and design choices and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I love so much of that. But when you get to see like them clearly interviewing the person in the modern day, it like adds an extra level of like, oh, that's really cool. So I love that sequence in particular. The Matterhorn stuff is really cool.
And it goes to show because Matterhorn's one of my favorite rides too.
Nice. It's one that I liked more when I was a kid, and nowadays I just feel like I'm too tall for it, and so my knees are always like banging around in it. I'm like, this isn't as fun as I would like it to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I like even that, like I love that the Matterhorn and like later Space Mountain were both like, hey, we need thrill rides for the kids. Like the teens don't look at Disneyland as like a place they want to go to, so we need to get something that brings the teens in. And so they end up creating those, roller coasters in almost response to the, increased roller coasters at places like Knott's Berry Farm and Magic Mountain. They're trying to, constantly one up each other, and kind of, I thought it was really cool, like design choices that led to those things. And then again, I like the idea that it has all these other limitations to it, where it's like, okay, you're going to build this thing, but it's also going to have a big hole in the middle of it because the Skyway's got to go through it, and you gotta you gotta have like people being able to like do the mountain climbing thing down the side of it, and just kind of all these like fantastical rules that they wanted to like impose on this design, and the guy who's never had to design a roller coaster before.
Yep, and he did it, and it's one of the best ones.
He rises to the challenge. Of course, the name itself, Imagineers, coming from the crossroad of imagination and engineering. There's like so many great quotes like that in here. Another one you have surrounding Epcot is what is it? If the Magic Kingdom is fantasy made real, Epcot is reality made fantastic. Like I love just kind of that mentality and that mindset. Like I look at a show like this and I'm like, God, I wish I were an Imagineer in another life. Like,
right? I wish I was smart enough. I wish I was smart enough to do it.
It's like I think both of us are smart enough and creative enough to have done it, but I think you do, especially nowadays, you do need like an engineering like focus background to it as well to like really thrive off of it. You either need like a strong artistic or a strong engineering kind of drive, and focus. to really thrive, like especially in the later episodes where you get into like all the robotics and stuff that are now happening in Tomorrowland and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, I would never be able to design those things, but that's really cool. And if I had like seen something like this when I was 16, I would have maybe been like, okay, that's what I want to do with my life, and so let me figure out what I want, like how to go about and do that path. Let me go and take robotics classes and figure out, what to do with that. But yeah, just so many, like the whole series is filled with like great little anecdotes and stories about, the different rides as they come up. Any other highlights you want to visit?
Yeah, the photos from when they were digging out Disneyland.
Okay, yeah.
That to me stands out because they showed you what it looked like before, just these massive orange groves.
Yeah.
And then you see what they do as they terraform this section of planet Earth into a fantasy land. And it's just, with the levels of technology and everything else, like the manpower that went into building this thing. When you see them like building the lake, the artificial lake, when you see them building, like what they do for all of that is just astounding.
Yeah, I love in that sequence. I love they talk about, and this is like going. It would have been a way easier to be an Imagineer back then because they talk about the guy who kind of mapped out the Jungle Cruise ride. Didn't do it with like engineering drawings or anything like that. He took a sandbox and like dug trenches in the sandbox to build out like the path. And then once they got it to like a full scale kind of thing, he drove like the station wagon through the path of the river to kind of map out the timing and where the different showcases are going to be. And even that, like, I love that, like, they kind of highlight that was one of the first rides that ends up getting like revamped when Mark Davis comes in a few years later and is like, you know what Disneyland doesn't really have enough of? Humor. So let's add some like fun and joy and whimsy to this park. And so you end up getting, the modern Jungle Cruise ride that we now know that just has like all of the worst possible puns in the world. But they just give it so much charm and so much delight and just like a sense of fun and enjoyment. There's throughout so much of, especially those early days. One of the things that I wish they had explored more of that they just don't, are all like the long gone rides. Like the things they focus on are really still things that are in Disneyland today in some form or another. And so I would have loved to have like seen a little bit of focus on like the rides that they did have that have, gone by the wayside. It's just, so that's one of the things that, like, I would love kind of like an extra features sequence on stuff like that, because there are so many, and you get like little teases of it here and there. Like when they talk about in a later episode about Splash Mountain, they talk about how that's pretty much like completely repurposing a thing that was basically there for the bicentennial, and that had come and gone. So they try and like take as much of those animatronics and repurpose them and reuse them for Splash Mountain. But I'm like, well, but tell me about that bicentennial thing. I want to know what that was about too, and I want to hear the ins and outs of that thing. Without necessarily having to go to like Defunctland or on YouTube or something like that. Although that is a great, series for people who are out there interested in that kind of thing. But yeah, like that's one of the things that I wish it had a little bit more of, are like the rides that aren't a presence anymore, but were for years and years and years. One of them in particular, and this segues into one of the questions I posed to you before we started recording, so you had some time to think about it if you needed it. But one of the things I think about when I watch this is like, what would I design if I were an Imagineer? What would I want to do? And the one I come to is like, I loved the Skyway. And it I got to go on it growing up. I remember like riding it across from like Frontierland or wherever to Tomorrowland, and then I just remember at some point like it being gone.
Yep.
And you could still go for years and years, and you could still see like one of the kind of the like the entrance ways for it. But like especially now with Star Wars Land, like it's all gone now. But the thing I was thinking about as I was rewatching these episodes is like, I would want to bring back the Skyway in some form. And I think now that it basically would be from Star Wars Land to Tomorrowland, you can basically turn it into, like, instead of it being like a ski lodge type thing, I would make it like a hyperspace lane or something like that, where it's you're getting in X-wings or you're getting in Y-wings or you're getting in like TIE fighters or whatever, and you're flying those across Star Wars from Star Wars or across Disneyland from Star Wars Land to like Star Tours in Tomorrowland. I would love to, like, that's what I would have in my mind, is like how to bring that ride back, make it, you know, something that works for a modern age and still ties in thematically to kind of its history in the park. So that's the Imagineering ride I would do if I were an Imagineer. How about you, Cam?
So I thought about this, and I realized that one of my favorite rides that they've revamped into the Little Nemo ride was the Underwater Adventure.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I loved seeing the dragon at the bottom of the lake.
Oh yeah.
I thought that was just the coolest thing, that there was the sea serpent there. And it was just a hidden little gem in this thing, and it wasn't really related to any rides or anything like that, but or to any films or any kind of properties. It was just a cool thing they did. But thinking back to it and looking at what people's responses have been to the is it Rise of the Resistance ride that they just put out in Star Wars Land?
Yep, that's the newest one.
You could really do something amazing and also touch on an animated film that I feel is super underrated and not cared for enough, which is Atlantis, The Lost City. Atlantis is a phenomenal film. Has some incredible voice talent, just an awesome story. Just loved it. Love it to this day also. And I feel it's in a rough period where it's kind of in that rough period where it's like the era of like Atlantis, Lilo and Stitch, kind of like they're very like beloved, especially overseas. They're very beloved, but their American fan base just is not very potent, especially for Stitch. Stitch is internationally super famous, but in America it's just kind of like, oh yeah, he's fine. It's like, oh nope, you don't understand how great Stitch is, but whatever. I digress. Definitely could have come on here and talked about Lilo and Stitch, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, it's because like those stuff like Atlantis and Lilo and Stitch, like you have those being the Disney movies that had the unfortunate like trial of living in a Pixar world. Like
that's true.
Pixar came, you know, on the scene with Toy Story in '95 and really just started like eating Disney's lunch for years and years and years.
Yeah, until Bob Iger bought them.
Yeah, so the was it Bob Iger, or was that still a Michael Eisner thing? I don't remember.
I think it was Bob Iger.
Whichever case it was, you did have like that was a like stuff like Atlantis and because Treasure Island is a Disney one too, isn't it? Yeah, so you have those like still trying to carry on the tradition of 2D animation in a world that has increasingly been like, oh, look at the cool shiny new 3D animation thing, and that was where kind of all eyes went. But I do like that, you know, those are kinds of things that, you know, people are potentially getting reintroduced to now with Disney Plus. Like we talked a little bit earlier about Princess and the Frog. Like that is one that I had just never sat down with until Disney Plus came out, and I was like, you know what? Like I want to go and watch Princess and the Frog. And it's good. It's a good movie. It's got great music.
Oh, the music's great. It's that big band. It's that big band. Yeah. New Orleans feel. It's great. It has the spirit of New Orleans throughout the entire thing. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, Keith David's like a very fun like villain in that. It is just like it's weird because it's trying to market itself as like, you know, Disney fairy tale, but in a much more modern setting than we see in any of like the Disney fairy tales we're used to. Like the fact that it is, you know, a modern tale ish, you know, be it, you know, something in the 1900s and beyond seems out of place with everything else that like the iconic, you know, Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin or Little Mermaid, or like those are all have so much more of a timeless feel because of them existing in a, you know, a distant past enough compared to like anything really set in America feels too contemporary for like a fairy tale. Like even Pocahontas, you get away with because it is like 200, 300 years ago or whatever, 400 years ago, I guess. But like even that has like enough history behind it that that it kind of gets away with it, versus like the modern fairy tale that they were trying to tell that just like feels at odds with what you think of when you think of a Disney princess story.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. But so back to the question though, what would I do?
Yes.
There's this awesome part in Atlantis where they're heading down in the submarine to go through to the entrance of Atlantis, and they end up encountering the Leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
And the Leviathan is this incredible, just like artifice creature, made out of like, machines, and its lair is literally littered with ships from just about every age of sailing, in the history of humanity. And this thing has just been like clamping down and destroying, tearing apart these ships for thousands of years. And I thought, wow, what you could do to really revamp that submarine ride and kind of in touch with the kind of excitement that you get from what I've been hearing people talk about Rise of the Resistance from, would be like the Leviathan chase, or like the escape from the Leviathan, as like, and you're trying to like get down to the entrance of Atlantis, because it's like, or you could call it the expedition to Atlantis, and you have to run away from this thing. And like you could totally do just like an on the rails kind of ride like they normally do, but you could make it with like some more excitement behind it. You could incorporate an older Disney property. It would be at the same time very fun and very contemporary with kind of the future of kind of attractions as they're going through. But also be something that's like a sit down that you don't have to like walk through a lot of. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because that actually, and I don't know if you're building off of this, but I was just looking because I was like, it seems like Atlantis would have been something that they could have done in one of the other parks, especially in like the second Japanese park that they kind of touch on later on, where there's so much like of a water component to it.
It's like the Sea Disney, basically.
Yeah. So I was looking to see, and it. I found a BuzzFeed article that basically says like rides that never were, and Atlantis Expedition was originally was originally pitched at one point in time as like a reskinning of the submarine voyage that we end up getting with the Nemo ride. So yeah, it says in the BuzzFeed article I'm looking at, it says why it wasn't built. Atlantis, the Lost Empire, bombed at the box office, and the idea was scrapped. Eventually, the ride was reopened in 2007 as Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage. So yeah, in a what if kind of world, you would have had your adventure with a Michael Fox voiced Milo traveling in that submarine voyage.
You can't tell me it wouldn't have been awesome. It would have been so awesome.
I mean, especially like the thing I love about the Finding Nemo ride now is that they really, again, moving they continue to embrace like technology, and so much of that is like where it was just kind of static images that like static scenes that had been built under the water. Now it is like a lot of that ride is you are watching projections on like monitors outside of the submarine portholes, and so yeah, you could have absolutely still done the same kind of thing with a larger than life animated Leviathan kind of attacking you and play with that. Yeah, I think it's definitely something that they could have explored. So yeah, and seemingly because a lot of Finding Nemo is still the old style. Like it is still a lot of the submarine voyage, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, whatever it used to be, is still there in its framework and stuff. So it could be, maybe you could do it as like a reskinned in the way that they've got like Haunted Mansion that turns into Nightmare Before Christmas for a few months a year. Just be like, hey, we're gonna journey to Atlantis for this limited time, and then it goes back to being the Finding Nemo ride, here and there. But
see,
yeah,
I actually had the idea also to do a Halloween themed Tomorrowland, like for like the couple weeks that they do it for the Haunted Mansion Nightmare Before Christmas, if you did that same kind of approach to Tomorrowland with like kind of like a space terror vibe.
Well, they do that with Space Mountain.
They do that with Space Mountain, but what if they put that throughout the rest of Tomorrowland? It was my idea.
Yeah.
Because I think like with Space Mountain, they just kind of make it like a little spooky. It's just different lights.
Yeah, it's different lights, and they have projections that are like you're basically in a ghost galaxy or something like that, and there's like skulls and stuff,
which is cool. But like, what if you did that to everything? What if it was like a dysfunctional like the utopia of Tomorrowland has been twisted and turned?
Yeah.
You could also do it like tongue in cheek. This is definitely spitballing way outside of like the realm of possibility. But you could make it where like a tongue in cheek. It's like the errors of like unchecked capitalism, which Disney would never be for because they thrive in that environment. But like no, you could totally do that. Like it'd be cool. But originally I was going to pitch that, and I was like, but wait, what about the underwater ride? Because like it's just so. It's cool that it's Finding Nemo. I love Finding Nemo, but it was like I'm one of those people who's just like, I think it was better back when it was just like an undersea adventure. Like sure, throw some Nemo in there, but like make it like less about Nemo and more about just like being under the sea. And now my idea is like, well, what if you were to run from a giant mechanical Leviathan? And wouldn't it be cool if like in that area you have the animatronic Leviathan just like roaming around? And you could kind of like see it under the water the way you kind of see the submarine and stuff. It'd be so cool. It'd be so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I miss about like that lagoon is that there isn't as much of a show for people who are not on the ride anymore. Like there's a little bit, like you have the seagulls out there that are going, mine, 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 mine. But like that, I wish there were something under the surface that were going on there. Be it, Crush, surfing through the whatever the southeast current or whatever it is. There's definitely more they could be doing with it, I think. So, yeah, very cool. It's a great idea. I love it. And now I kind of want to go and watch Atlantis. So maybe you and I will sit down on a future episode and talk about that one. If it's on I imagine it's on there, but like they do have some weird like obscure things that aren't because of other existing deals and whatnot. But very cool. So let's dive into the report card. I have a feeling I know what you're going to give it, but what grade from A+ to F would you give the Imagineering Story, Cameron?
Oh, A+, 100%.
Yep, same. A+ for me as well. Excellent. It is a wonderful series, wonderful documentary, especially if you are a fan of Disney and Disneyland and the Disneylands in particular. But yeah, just kind of, even if you're not, it's a wonderful story about the innovation and creative spirit of that kind of fuels so much of the Disney business. So let's look at some extra credit, other suggestions if you like this show. Some of the ones that Disney Plus recommends are Waking Sleeping Beauty, which is a revealing look at the events that ushered in the second chapter of Disney's animation legacy. You have Frank and Ollie, which is a documentary about the Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. You have Assembling a Universe, which is a look at kind of building the Marvel Studios behemoth that it has turned into. One that Cameron has talked about a couple times on here, Empire of Dreams, the story of the Star Wars trilogy. That is the one you've talked about, right?
Yes, it is.
Yep. Yep. And then it's not one of the ones that like is auto recommended, but it's one I'm going to throw out there. In this same kind of vein, there's both a full length feature as well as a series of shorts called One Day at Disney. That basically is like they go and look at and interview a bunch of people across the Disney kind of company, be it people who work at Disneyland, people who work at ESPN, people who work, on the cruise ships, whatever the case may be. Like and they just kind of like find out what those people's jobs are. One in particular, going off of your kind of the Imagineering ride you would look at, Cam. One of the shorts looks at a guy who's basically a scuba diver for Disneyland, and he goes and he dives into the Jungle Cruise River, and he dives into the lagoon there for Finding Nemo, and basically just like nightly kind of checks out, like make sure that everything's working and functioning the way it should. And it's just like, you don't think of a scuba diver working at Disneyland, but there you go. So you can hear his story and many others like it if you go and watch One Day at Disney. Extracurriculars. So what else are we watching on Disney Plus? You watching anything else, Cameron, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm watching High School Musical, the musical. Or High School Musical, the movie, the musical.
High School...
The show.
We ran into this last week, too. High School Musical, the musical, the series.
Yeah.
Because basically there is High School Musical, the musical, is a musical production that schools and professional companies can put on, and it's basically the musical version of the show. And so the show is riffing on that by saying, like, okay, we're gonna add one more colon, and we're gonna make that musical about a TV show. Or we're going to make a TV show about that musical.
Yeah. About a school putting on that musical.
Yes.
And that's actually...
Specifically the school from High School Musical putting on that musical.
Which is super weird, because, like, that's a school just, like, in the middle of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
that was where they...
Although I enjoyed the first, like, one of the first moments with that STEM teacher. Mm-hmm. He goes, first off, we're not the Wildcats. We're the leopards.
We're the leopards. Always have been.
Always have been. And it's just like, yes. Here is, like, the one person who's just, like, super not enamored by anything going on here.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
Yeah. He's a fun character. Very cool. You've only watched the first episode so far?
Yeah, just the first episode.
Yeah. I very much look forward to kind of hearing your thoughts on that show. I mean, we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but what are your takeaways from the first episode?
It really wasn't winning me over until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
There was just so much, like, there's just so much cringe to it because it's high school.
Yeah.
And anything that's true, like anything that's actually true to high school will be cringy. That's just a universal rule, because high school is just 4 years of cringing through life. Because you think these things are super important, and you think these things are really impactful and going to mean something in the long run of your life, and they're so important to you at that moment that nothing else could be more important than that. And because of that, as somebody with, like, the perspective of an adult, it cringes in your heart, and you, like, just like, I was like this.
Yep.
Oh, I was like this so much. Oh no. Okay. But no, I'm loving it. As far as, like, the very end hooked me, because he gets up and he does, like, a very typical teenage thing, like, coldly, codingly alluding to things, and it actually not making any difference, because, like, no, like, you did what you did. Like, that's not how it works, man. Like, you bailed.
You're talking about Ricky?
About Ricky.
Yep.
Ricky comes up and he sings this song, and he expects it's gonna, like, fix his relationship with his girlfriend, and she's like, no, you bailed.
Yeah, and he still chickens out at the, like, I love you part, which, like, was the whole reason for the issue. Yeah. It is one of those, like, because if you haven't watched the show, like, the premise is basically, like, the girl sang a quirky little song where she basically confesses that she loves her boyfriend, and he doesn't say it back, and it causes problems. And then the end of that first episode, he's trying to win her back, he's trying to win her back by, like, auditioning for the play High School Musical, the musical, and he sings her song in the audition to try and, like, win over her heart. But when it gets to the, like, I love you part of it, he still can't say it, and so he kind of mumbles through it. And, like, I like that moment because, like, you can see in her reactions that, like, she's annoyed by it, but she's also still charmed by him, until he still, like, botches it again, and then she's just like, there's no hope for this guy.
Nope. But you can see the look on her current boyfriend's face.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, this guy is literally, like, trying to, like, woo back his ex-girlfriend, who's my girlfriend, right in front of me. And, like, decorum and, like, the rules of society say I can't just stand up and punch him in the face.
Yeah.
Like, it's very much like he's extremely annoyed and also a little embarrassed, because he's, like, he's come out and publicly, like, basically really supported his girlfriend in what she's doing, and it's so and then at the very end when it's just like I mean they already spoil it in all the promos, but yeah, Ricky gets Troy, and it's just like he's at a moment where he's dejected because she's just totally rejected his song, which was her song, and he botched at the end. And he's like so totally dejected and like ready to walk away from it, and then it's like, no, you can't walk away from it. You're actually going to be pulled deeper into it.
Yeah.
Also, this this Nina girl comes over, or not Nina, the girl who thought she was going to get Gabriella.
Yeah.
She comes in and she's like, I'm like, cool. This is like a cool dynamic, where she's way too serious about it's like these kids who are way too serious about theater, and a kid who isn't. And then the only the only sterling silver level of trust and a character that you can rely on is Big Red.
Yes, you love your Big Red.
Big Red is a great kid, and I he's just solid kid, clearly going to be the crux of supporting people on this show. And it's because this kid is not a star, he is just 100%. Was I a Big Red? No, I was not. But do I wish I was a Big Red in high school? Yeah.
Fair. Very cool. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the show as you continue through it. As I've talked about on this show, I very much enjoyed my time with High School Musical, the series. I'm trying to think if I've been watching anything outside of stuff for the purposes of this show, and I don't think I have. Like I said, I watched Phantom of the Megaplex, but I will hopefully talk about that on a future episode with Logan if when he's feeling better from his strep throat. And then I think outside of that, I've just kind of been working on website stuff and playing some video games and stuff. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you again, Cameron, for joining me kind of last minute to talk about the Imagineering Story.
For sure.
If you guys haven't watched it, go check it out. The entire series is just great. It's a ton of fun. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot, 2 B's, 2 T's. Anything you want to shout out or plug, Cameron?
Yes. Wait. No.
Okay.
I was like, oh, I have something coming. It's like, no, I don't. I haven't been working on anything. I've been taking care of a bunch of other stuff in my life.
All right.
No, nothing. I have nothing new coming out right now.
All right. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I don't think I have anything really crazy to plug. We will be launching Season 2 of That Ultimate Video Game List show coming here in a couple weeks, depending on when you're listening to this. I sat down and got kind of the Season 2 cast of panelists sorted out this last weekend, so we should start recording next week as Cam and I are sitting here recording this. So I look forward to hopping into that soon and returning to that show, because that one and this one are two of my favorite things that we're getting to do with That Nerdy Site. And so, yay for all of the fun stuff. You can follow everything at That Nerdy Site, or all of the latest that we're doing at thatnerdysite.com. If you like what you heard, again, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you are so inclined, you can always support us at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. We would greatly appreciate it. And as one more reminder, if you do want to be a part of the show, you can go fill out our guest form at thatnerdysite.com/D+guest. Let us know kind of what Disney Plus offerings you would want to talk about on the show. If you are pitching that you want to do a TV show like this one, I should probably update the form to say hey, if you're pitching a TV show, highlight a few episodes. We're not going to have time to watch every episode of a show necessarily just for the sake of one of these D Plus episodes. But thank you to everybody who's already filled that out. And if you are so inclined, feel free to do that. Once again, thatnerdysite.com/D+guest. We'll take you to the form for that. And then I will be in touch at some point. So thank you again for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.